I think people would come, and Bhagavan might suggest self-inquiry, and they would try it, and they found it too abstract, too analytical. It wasn't catering to their inherent devotional instincts, and they would feel more of an attraction to a devotional path. So they would ask Bhagavan for permission to do this, and he would always grant it. He liked people to do self-inquiry, but he realized that it wasn't a one-size-fits-all method, and that some people were not temperamentally suited to that. So then he would say, okay, surrender unconditionally to the self. But having said that, he was the first to admit that this is, for the vast majority of people, an absolutely impossible thing to do. You cannot say, God, I surrender to you in one session, in one jump, in one process. Bhagavan accepted this. He said, your notion of I is so embedded, so inherently strong, you can't give it up by a desire, by an act of will, or by notionally offering yourself and everything you do to God. So what Bhagavan recommended to one or two people was to have faith that God is running your life, and I won't say test him, but prove it to yourself by offering small amounts of all the things that bother you, the things that are going on in your life. He would say, you think that right now you are in charge of your life, that you have to make choices and decisions, and that the outcomes of all your activities have to come from the choices that you make. He said, that's completely wrong. He said, God is running this world. You as an individual person are not even in that world. Your choices and your decisions, the actions that you perform, all arise from your totally erroneous notion that you are a person who lives inside a body. And once you have come to that conclusion, arrived at that idea of yourself, then automatically you have to defend that notion by defending the body, having ideas about how to protect the body, what plans the body is going to undergo and execute. He said that's all wrong. But you can't give that up as an idea. It's such a deeply rooted, severely entrenched program that you have to convince yourself bit by bit that this is not a valid way of living in the world, and it's based on a false premise. So he said, just think of something that's going on in your life that's bothering you. Approach your notion of God. It might be me, it might be some idea of the divine, it might be a form, and just say, right now this problem is bothering me. I hereby hand it over to you. You deal with it. And he said, then you can't cheat on this. You can't then go back to your normal lifestyle and carry on worrying about it. He said that's like throwing out all your garbage and saying, I've got rid of it, and then when no one is looking, you collect it all up, bring it in your house and throw it all over your living room floor. He said you've got to have that determination, which is quite counterintuitive, that it's not your business anymore, it's not your responsibility. Let's say, I don't know, your grandmother is sick, and you're worried about your grandmother being sick. You go to Bhagavan, you go to God, and you say, Bhagavan, this idea in my head is bothering me. I have a worry, a concern that this is going on. Please take care of it. Please take this thought out of my head. And if you want to cure Granny, that's a bonus. But I don't want to have this thought bothering me anymore. Then you go back to living your life. And it's not going to work if 5 minutes later you start worrying about Granny again. You have to make this determined effort once you've handed over this little parcel of your worries and your concerns to say, I've put that out in the garbage can in the yard, it's not coming back in my house again. And he said, if you can do this with small details of your life, quite amazingly you'll find that they resolve themselves better than if you yourself had decided, I'm in charge of this situation, I'm going to hire the best doctors, I'm going to get her treatment, I'm going to visit her every day. Just the simple act of handing over this story to the higher power and dropping it from all the things that go on in your mind that would normally worry about these things. He said, just handing over one simple story and waiting and saying, I have given it to you. more often than not, something quite unexpected will happen. You'll get a good result out of it, and then you'll think to yourself, well, that worked. I'm going to try a slightly bigger story. So bit by bit, you start unloading all your problems, all your concerns, all your ideas. Then it's not always going to work, but after you've done that for some time, and you start to do your mental accounts, then you come to the conclusion that handing over these problems to Bhagavan has a higher percentage success rate than me trying to solve them myself. So he said, you establish the faith, the conviction that God can look after all these problems, all these concerns better than I can. You find that out empirically by forcing yourself to hand them over to this higher power, standing back and waiting for events to unfold. And the more often you succeed, or the more often you get good results from doing this, the more often you feel inclined to say, well, that solves that problem. What's the next biggie what's the next biggie in my life? I will try and hand that one over as well. So it's a kind of salami approach. You can't throw the whole sausage at God and say, take it, I'm finished. You take the first slice off and you say, here, have a taste, and it works, and so you chop off 2 centimeters the next time and you throw it. And bit by bit you manage to hand over virtually all of your concerns about the way you run your life, because you get proof that the surrender is working simply by the feedback that comes from having these problems resolve themselves. I have found this out from my own experience, and Bhagavan said this is a very good way of convincing yourself that handing things over piece by piece is a good and valid way of eliminating this idea that there's a person inside your body who is responsible for all these things, and who has to take decisions to get the right outcome. The analogy I like is, the younger people need this explained to them. 50 years ago, telephone exchanges had women inside them who took plugs out of one socket and made connections in the next socket, and that's how you got your phones connected. These all got superseded by automatic exchanges, where if you dialed the right number, there was no middleman, there was no intermediary. The call went through the right circuit in the exchange, and the right person got the call. What we are doing is pretending that we are in charge of a kind of telephone exchange inside our head, which needs our intervention to make things happen well. In fact, what we're doing is pulling out random plugs in there, sticking them in the wrong holes and getting bad results. We need to know and understand that Ishwara, God, is looking after the world, and that anything that we do is simply going to get in his way. We're the person who ignorantly is running around the inside of this fictional telephone exchange, messing up with the wiring of Ishwara's world and trying to do a better job of running it. And the more we can step back and come to the conviction, the conclusion that all this is humming along quite nicely and it doesn't need my intervention, the more smoothly your life will go. And finally, you'll just learn to understand the whole thing works by itself. It doesn't need my intervention. God is running this to the best possible outcome. I will stay out. At that point, when you've stopped taking decisions, when you've stopped thinking I am the doer, when you stop thinking I must do this, I must accomplish this, God is in charge of anything, then your I retreats back into the self and disappears.